Go ahead and ease the paper towels back up out of there. Set the new seals installed in the lower intake back down here and put the bolts to it. Okay, the new seals are installed. They're oil free. The surface is oil free. This installs with the Ford part number on the facing the passenger side. Some kind of grid on the driver's side. Well, the install was pretty uneventful. I just kind of held it against this fuel rail. Got it past this one with the back down, and it just fell in there, so it even landed good enough I didn't have to move it around for any of the bolts to go in. I recommend plugging these holes with paper towels or whatever. So you get done putting these bolts in and you drop one down in there, you'll be unhappy. Go ahead and install the 12 bolts. Torque them down to 110 to 120 inch-pounds. There doesn't seem to be an established torque pattern for the lower intake. So I'm just going to start with the center and a crisscross pattern at half the max torque. Get them all down to say 60 inch-pounds and then finish up from the center out to 110 inch-pounds. This throttle body is to only be cleaned with some type of solvent like carburetor cleaner, intake cleaner, or mass airflow sensor cleaner, and a toothbrush. Open the throttle flap up and take a toothbrush laced with carb cleaner and just scrub where this flap closes on the top and bottom, and scrub as much of the flap off as you can on the sides of it, on the edge, I guess, on the edge of it. Get all that carbon off of there, and the bore where it's black. Got to dissolve that down so that it's not restricting the airflow through it at an idle. Or it'll eventually set a code for it unable to control the idle air. Looks pretty good. Alright, where that lip goes, plus about an 1/8 inch behind it, both the top and the bottom. On the sides and everything. Looks good. Be sure you don't scratch that bore where that flap makes contact with any metal or anything. It'll stick if it does, more likely. And don't break any of your nipples off, or you're going to have a bad day. I've cleaned this surface off. Just need to stick new O-rings on here. Make sure nothing's fell down in there. And if your EGR valve O-ring looks flattened out or doesn't fit real tight, you'll want to put a new one of them. This EGR valve pipe O-ring. All the lower intake bolts are installed and tightened down to 110 inch-pounds. This EGR valve tube actually has 3 holes in it. One facing the front and 2 facing the back. Check it for carbon down in the tube and remove accordingly, but this one seems open reasonable. These seals do have a particular pattern noted by the slot on the end of one of them that the slot will fit into. Just make sure they're all pushed down in there and level all across as much as possible. Put the other one in, slot forward. The gasket has this notch on it. Make sure the seals stay down. I had one wanting to keep pop up on this end, and that can get you when you're setting a plenum on blindly. You can't see that. Make sure the EGR valve passage is cleaned out. Put a light haze of oil on there inside of it, and or oil up your O-ring. Make sure your EGR valve passage tube is cleaned out. The holes are open in it. And that your O-rings are all down. I'm putting a thin coating of motor oil on the evap nipples. I set the plenum on there at an angle. I'm going to go ahead and stick the plug wires in their guide before it goes on back. Now that it's in position, check to make sure all the O-rings are down, none of them's popped up. Feed the EGR valve tube up into its hole and ease the plenum on down, checking your O-rings for alignment. I just wiggled the plenum down on the EGR valve O-ring. It was a little stiff, but it finally went. Make sure your idle air control wire is ready to come up through to its proper alignment. Center this plenum over the dowel pins. Check your O-rings again. I went ahead and slipped this evap line up on the nipple on this side because of the close tolerance. I didn't put the clip in yet. But I'm going to hold this plenum down on the dowel pins and start feeding the screws back into it. Make sure your PCV valve's pushed back out of the way. Yep, that's how the back one's going in alright. That's the other back one. Just make sure you start these in straight. Once you get all 8 of your bolts tightened down to 62 inch-pounds, start reconnecting your vacuum lines, the PCV valve pipes for the vacuum head. Put the little nipple that supports the PCV valve back in its hole, and hook your PCV valve vents up. Then your brake booster, your main vacuum line, your EVR, plug in and vacuum lines, your evap lines, put the clips back into it. Brake booster lines back on, main vacuum's back on, EVR solenoid's plugged in, vacuum lines on it, IAC's plugged back in, wire routed original. evap lines have their clips holding them on. The EGR valve pipe looks centered and square. Plug the throttle position sensor in. Plug wires are snapped on the back. And it's time to put the throttle cable and the cruise control cable back into their respective slots. And their supports. This is how they're arranged. Put this cable with the lead end on it. Open the wide open throttle, slip it in there, let it close up, snap this back on, check and make sure it's hooked on good. Throttle body is nice. Now put the air tube back on. Tighten the clamps down. Put all these vent tubes and mass airflow wire support bracket back on. Plastic deal. The air tube actually mounts slightly supported, and with a gap between it and the fan shroud, preferably. Has a little notch here on top to line up. Clamps are tight, all the hoses are back in. Time to put the beauty cover back on it. That's nice. That should take care of the surgeon problem and the lean bank code. The tune-up I'm putting in, it's going to take care of the misfires and make it worthy again and emission friendly. Okay, let's see how it does with the new Plenum gasket. See if it stops that surging on startup. And I didn't drop any major pieces down into the intake ports. That's always a plus if that didn't happen. I'm glad it doesn't happen. Sounds pretty good. Ready for the racetrack. Yeah, it's got a lot more zip. Now it just needs a timing chain put in it. I'll finish the tune-up on it and take it for a drive and let it warm up later. It's going to have to learn. Well, I'm going to go ahead and I didn't unhook the battery when I worked on it because I won't be getting in any electric. I don't have problems like that. But I'm going to do a keep alive memory reset on it to clear the old learned fuel values. That's something you'll want to do if you didn't unhook the battery, is to clear the learned idle values for the damaged components, because it's going to be expecting a lot more air entering into the motor, and if it's not anymore, it's going to be adding a lot of fuel trying to compensate for the learned values that aren't there anymore, so it could cause an issue. It'll learn it eventually, but better just start off fresh. And get this back to its owner.